It was a very, very different feel here last night. We were down here with protesters in front of this police station behind me ahead of the curfew at 8 o'clock. It was a much smaller group, but it was very edgy, and there was definitely a sense that things would turn quite nasty quite quickly. The police had warned them that if they didn't move away from these streets by 8 o'clock, that they would move in and force them to leave, and that is exactly what happened. All these streets around me here were filled with tear gas, and in the brief 2 hours of chaos that we witnessed, we saw multiple people be hit with rubber bullets. The irony, of course, that the very thing that's fueled these protests, this sense of perceived brutality by the police, this heavy-handedness, particularly towards black Americans, was on display, as it was across America, as peaceful protest quickly descended into chaos. In the last hour or so, the president has tweeted that the radical left-wing anti-fascist group Antifa, who he and many others believe were responsible for some of the violence, at least, that we've seen here on the streets of Minneapolis, that they would be designated a terrorist organization. But anyone, as you mentioned earlier, looking for him to call for calm, unity, to bring about some kind of national healing, well, Matt, that was not forthcoming. A wall of police emerged to disperse protesters. As tear gas was fired, a panicked crowd quickly scattered. Police had warned a violation of curfew would not be tolerated, and they swiftly descended.
Look at them shooting. I know y'all see them. Look at them. There's a boiling point, and we're here today. 2020 is the year we fight back, and it's regardless of skin color. It's about your social status. We need to fight against this. This is evil, and we've had enough.
It doesn't matter if there's a curfew. We're going to change things, even if they try and silence us.
At the center of it all, the black man George Floyd, whose death at the hands of white police has sparked fury across America.
Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up!
But after 4 nights of uncontrolled rage on the streets, the authorities were determined this night would be the last. Fifth night here, the police have promised that they would be on the street. The National Guard have come out. They're firing tear gas. Protesters are throwing bottles. It's all getting quite nasty here, and there's anything but peaceful protest.
Get inside! Get in your house now! Let's go!
As tensions rose, even those not protesting and staying in the safety of their homes were targeted.
Go inside now! Get in the house!
Police held positions on the roof as rebel protesters revved in anger. The crackdown was swift, sometimes painful. So it was across America, from Minneapolis to New York, where police turned on crowds, at times with what seemed like little provocation. This scene in Brooklyn of a police car ramming a baying crowd went viral. In Seattle, multiple police officers restrained this protester, while one demonstrator fought back in Kansas City. In Detroit, they hurled fireworks at police.
I took my helmet off, they laid the batons down. I want to make this a parade, not a protest.
Though one sheriff in Michigan downed tools and offered to join the demonstrators. Across the country, though, hundreds were arrested as clashes erupted between police and protesters. Buildings were set on fire, and looting here in LA spread into the early hours. Even in Washington, D.C., scenes turned ugly as a hotel was set on fire just moments from the White House. As night fell in Minneapolis, the police crackdown continued. Pockets of violence flared as demonstrators regrouped and dug in. The National Guard swept in as backup. The police are out in force tonight. Things have got much nastier. Tear gas, rubber bullets. As you can see behind me, the National Guard are here. They are armed. They are determined to push the protesters back, get them out of the centre and put an end to this crisis. The strategy appeared to work last night, but the sense of anger here so palpable, it's unlikely the protesters won't return.
Siobhan Kennedy. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is the columnist from the Washington Post, Jonathan Capehart. Jonathan, great to talk to you again, albeit under rather miserable circumstances. I mean, when you look at the violence, the demonstrations, also the violence from the police, it seems to be unhinged. What is going on right now?
You know, Matt, I wish I had the answer to your question, because I'm asking that question of myself as well. Why have things just gone so unhinged? I mean, we know the answer to it, that your reporter, Siobhan, laid it out. I mean, the relationship between the Black community and law enforcement, no matter what city you look at, overall, generally speaking, has not been good. That there have been tensions, that there have been cases of abuse where the community, as a result of the murder, really, of George Floyd in Minneapolis, was the jumping off point for a release of decades worth of frustrations. You know, Matt, I don't know if you remember, but one of the first times we did television together was when you were here in Washington. And it was on the day that then Democratic presidential candidate Barack Obama, the then senator from Illinois, gave a speech in Philadelphia on race. And all of us were raving about this incredible speech and the message that he had to send, the nuance of his message, acknowledging the pains and the frustrations of African Americans and white Americans. And now fast forward 12 years later almost, and we're looking at a very different country, a very different presidency.
We'll talk about the presidency in a minute, but what strikes me as odd is that in this era of COVID, you know, of social distancing, of people being afraid to get the virus, that rage has completely trumped, for want of a better word, the fear of getting ill.
Well, that is another sign of just how serious this is. Remember, people were they were socially distancing, they were staying at home. But the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was a bridge too far. We all watched it. We all, actually, I've not watched the video in its entirety past 10 seconds because it is just too painful to watch. But America watched that. People of conscience watched that and decided that that was a bridge too far for them, and that stay-at-home orders, social distancing, forget it. They were taking it to the streets.
As I said at the beginning of the program, it's been a very bad year for America because of COVID, the number of deaths, you know, the state of the economy. Do these riots and demonstrations, does this terrible tragedy come as a distraction from all those things for Donald Trump in the middle of a year where he's fighting for re-election?
Well, the president is always looking for a distraction from the thing that would maybe have people focus on the presidential election in its totality. But I don't think that these demonstrations are going to work in the president's favor, in that they're trying to shift the focus and put the blame on people who are protesting about extrajudicial killings of Americans. The president can try as he might to distract, but I think what we have seen from Minneapolis to Louisville to Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. to New York City, these demonstrations are happening all over the country for a reason.
In 10 seconds, where and when will this end, briefly?
Matt, I don't know.
Okay. Jonathan Capehart, thank you very much indeed. Hundreds of people in London have ignored social distancing rules to demonstrate in solidarity with American activists over the killing of George Floyd. The Black Lives Matter protest started in Trafalgar Square before marching past Downing Street and the Houses of Parliament en route to the US Embassy in Battersea. Protesters said they were happy to take the risk of catching the virus as the issue was so important.
The killing in America is not comparable with what's going on here today. But the infrastructure, the system needs to change, where black people are still systematically prejudiced against.
We're here in a peaceful way, but there's no judgment in their reaction because it's very different there and living there, and your natural reaction after seeing that is to want to rage, and I don't think we can judge their history to our history. We have to understand it's different, and we have to understand their anger.
To be honest, it affects everything with reference to people of colour. At the end of the day, social distancing, we're on the front line all the time. You know what I mean? So whether we're worrying about coming here, whether we're going to work, we're in the front line.